Anyway, welcome. Glad that you are here this morning. Of course, tomorrow is Memorial Day, and we'll be talking more about that later on in the lesson briefly. And no doubt it'll get mentioned several times. But as you can tell, if you were to look around, and as you probably look around this morning, that we have a number of our members that are out of town on vacations or taking advantage of the the 3-day weekend or 4-day weekend to get away. But then on the other hand, we have a lot of visitors that are here doing the exact same thing. And so if you're visiting with us, welcome. We're glad that you are here with us. Our class that we've been studying for this quarter is Like a Thief in the Night. And basically what we've been doing is we've been going down through what is taught in the world in terms of eschatology. When you think about eschatology is the study of the end times, basically. But really the word really has to do with the idea of just revealing things, revealing what the end times or the end days look like. And so we've been looking at that. From a biblical point of view that I teach anyway, and that almost everyone I know within the church that teaches, is the amillennial view, which is really quite easy to go through as a timeline. In terms of Jesus Christ coming to earth, living for approximately 33 years, dying on the cross, and in doing so, he established both the church and his kingdom, and today we live in that kingdom. We noticed last week that we are now in the last days, that the last days began on the day of Pentecost. By last days, we simply mean the end of the last historical era of humanity's on this earth. So we're living in the last days where both the church was established as well as his kingdom has been established, waiting for Jesus to come again. No one knows when he's going to come again. We spent, I think, 3 weeks looking at Matthew, the 24th chapter, which oftentimes is used quite a bit by premillennials in terms of looking for signs. But we learned from what Jesus said in Matthew 24 that the signs that people talk about today in terms of wars and rumors of wars and floods and famines and earthquakes and tornadoes and all those kinds of things, Jesus said, listen, do not be deceived or swayed. These are not the signs that you need to be looking for. There is a sign of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem that I told you about, and that sign is the armies of Rome are going to surround you, and when you see the armies surround you, then you need to be getting out of the city and fleeing to the mountains, okay? And hope that he says that it's not winter time, that you're not pregnant with child or you have young children. Hope it's not going to be on a Sabbath, some things like that, because you need to be able to get out of town. And then from verse 34 forward through the 25th chapter, Jesus talks about his second coming and the judgment of the world then. And he says there is no sign at all. Even in fact, I don't even know the sign. Because he says, no one knows the day nor the hours, not the angels of heaven, not the Son. Only God knows. And when he comes, he'll come like a thief in the night. And so you need to be always on guard. You always need to be vigilant and stay ready. And he uses 3 examples of why you need to stay alert and be ready for the coming, because he says they'll come like a thief in the night or like a woman with child pains and you don't know the hour. So the amillennial view is, like I say, is really simple in terms of a diagram. And at the second coming of Christ, there will be the great white throne judgment. There will be a general resurrection of both of the dead, both good and bad, and some will be caught into heaven and others will be going into eternal damnation. So this morning we're going to be looking at the Antichrist. Last week we talked about last days. This morning we're going to spend some time talking about this character that you'll hear talked about a lot. If you recall the timeline, let me see if I can get to it real quick like here. I thought I had a timeline there, but maybe I didn't. Okay, I didn't. The timeline for the premillennial view shows Jesus came to the earth. They said that he wasn't able to establish his kingdom because people rejected him as a king, so instead he established the church, and then years later he'll establish a kingdom. We've already debunked that quite a bit. We talked about signs. We've already dealt with that. And so now we come to the 2 antichrists. And so after the signs are there, before the tribulation begins, there will be a couple of antichrists that will come on the scene. One is to come from the European common market. I was listening to David Jeremiah just the other day talk about this, about how this Antichrist is going to come out of the European common market, and he is going to be a political leader, a huge political leader, and we'll talk more about that. And then later there will be another Antichrist that will come out of the Jewish people, and he will be a political leader as well. And these two will find themselves in opposition toward one another, which eventually will end in a terrible 7 years of tribulation, and then, of course, what we call the Battle of Armageddon. So we're going to look at what does it mean to be an Antichrist. So when you think about this word Antichrist, what are some of the things that you've heard people say about him? What are some things that you've heard people say about this Antichrist? Are you guys all afraid to say? Or do you just not know? Okay, he's supposed to be a one world ruler. In fact, there won't, presidents and prime ministers and kings and all this stuff will go away. There will be just one world ruler that will dominate the political scene, geopolitically speaking. What else have you heard? What? He's bad. He's a bad guy. Well, because of interest of time, what are some of the things that people have taught about this Antichrist by religious people? Well, there's a lot of things. One is that Larry mentioned that there's going to be it'll be a one world ruler. And even when it comes to the one world ruler, if you take the two Antichrists, one out of the European common market and then one as a Jewish in opposition, there will be one that's supposed to rise to the top and dominate the other. And that's going to be the European common market Antichrist. Okay, so he'll be a one world ruler. He's a bad guy. He is diabolical. Okay, diabolical. He comes from, I've already mentioned, the European common market. When you talk about the European common market, what they teach is that the old Roman Empire will be reconstituted. It'll come back in a different kind of way. And just as the Roman Empire in the days of Jesus ruled the known world at that time, there will be a reconstituted Roman Empire much like that. And from within the European political system, there will rise one to the top, and that'll be the Antichrist. There'll be a Jewish Antichrist that will emerge as well. He'll plunge the world into chaos. This chaos will eventually end in what is called the culmination of the Battle of Armageddon, as well as World War III. He'll bring in World War III. Have y'all been kind of watching the news lately about all the different things that are happening geopolitically in terms of wars in the world today? And if you listen to someone, they'll say, World War III has already started. It's already on the way, because of what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in parts of Africa, what's going on certainly in the Ukraine, and the threat of Putin keeps making on towards those who are in Europe and what they call the West. That is there. You have North Korea guy who is constantly threatening some kind of nuclear destruction. And so anyway, this one world leader is going to plunges into a great battle, and not just a great battle, but World War III. Even though there are some today who are saying, we're already in World War III. We just haven't drawn up the complete battle lines yet. He'll persecute Christians. There'll be a huge persecution of Christians. So some describe the Antichrist as a political ruler and as the prime mover in the events that will march man into World War III. He has a terrible personification of evil who will work more wholesale havoc than any other human being in the history of the world. So he's going to make Adolf Hitler look like a pansy, as compared to what he is going to do and how he is going to change the world. So what are the sources and where do they gather their ideas? Where do guys like Tim LaHaye and Rob Parsley and Jerry Jenkins and Hal Lindsey, where do they get those kinds of ideas? Where does it come from? Well, they say, it comes from, for instance, like the book of Daniel, chapter 11 and verse 31, where he talks about the abomination of desolation. But if you study the context of Daniel chapter 7, 8, 9, and 11, I think what you would discover in context that he's really talking about Alexander the Great becoming a world leader, conquering the world, and then his kingdom being divided up into with 4 generals. And you've probably heard the tradition that says that, when Alexander was lying on his deathbed and he had conquered most of the known world himself and Hellenized it, that the generals gathered around his bed and said, who is going to succeed you? Who is going to be the one who is going to take your place? And Alexander has been said to say, whoever's the strongest. And so basically what he's saying is that between these 4 generals, there's going to be a civil war that breaks out, which is true, is exactly what did happen. And his kingdom was divided up among 4 different rulers. And then out of those 4 rulers came one who was stronger, okay? And his name was Antiochus Epiphanes. And Antiochus Epiphanes was known as the abomination of desolation. He's the one, once he went into Jerusalem and conquered it, he went into Jerusalem and he sacrificed a pig on the altar in Jerusalem. And so he was an abomination of desolation. So Daniel chapter 11 is thought to, well, maybe that's where that is coming from. But the context is not about an antichrist. It's not about a political ruler of that kind of nature. Daniel, the 11th chapter, talks about the little horn of Daniel. And I remember when I was in school, I did a paper on the little horn of Daniel. Who is this one horn that rises up, this 11th horn that is able to subdue all the other horns? And I remember that at the end of the paper, when I drew my conclusion was, I said, well, it's either Antiochus Epiphanes or it's going to be Domitian of the Roman Empire, because those guys were absolutely terrible and they were diabolical. But anyway, Daniel chapter 11 is really about the breaking up of the Grecian Empire under Alexander. Ezekiel chapter 36 through 39, they use the words Gog and Magog a lot there, but really the context of Ezekiel chapter 36 and 39 is about Cyrus, the king of Persia, who is going to send the children of Israel back to the promised land, and it was fulfilled in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, where they did go back and repopulate, but it was about all those who are trying to get in the way of Cyrus sending the children of Israel back. Now, when he sent them back, you remember the Jewish people, when they were conquered under the Assyrian Empire in the first diaspora, and then later on with Babylon in the second diaspora, those 2 places scattered the Jewish people globally speaking, okay? And so they moved out of Israel and they're all over the world. And so when Cyrus, who conquers Babylon, decides that he's going to send the people back to Israel, he's a pretty good king, he's going to send them back, there was some resistance to that, and probably only about 1/4 of the Jews who went away into captivity returned back to Israel. But they returned back to Israel under Nehemiah and Ezra, and it was a complete return to that degree. And then, of course, we looked at Matthew, the 24th chapter, and verse 15 talks about the abomination of desolation that we identified as the Roman army and so on. And then, of course, the Revelation, the 13th chapter, is another one that is oftentimes cited, and that comes from talking about the first beast. So you remember that there is a red dragon, that's Satan, and he has 2 that are going to support him. And one is what is called the beast, the first beast, and the second is a beast that's going to support the first beast. So the beasts basically are agents of Satan, okay? And if you took my class on Revelation, then we've identified those, and I don't have time to mess around with that now. So anyway, if you're looking for an antichrist and what this guy looks like, then the guys that I just mentioned, their sources that they go back to is Daniel, Ezekiel, Matthew, and Revelation. But I think they obliterate the context in trying to get to where they want to be. Okay, so let me ask you this there. How many times do you think this term Antichrist is used in the Bible? How many times?
2.
He's mentioned, who said that? Dave? Okay, Dave said that he's mentioned twice. Anyone else? Patty? Okay, yeah, so Patty says, well, it's mentioned quite a bit in 1 John, so that's true, we're going to be looking at that. Well, you may be a little bit surprised when you read about the Bible, because the Antichrist is only mentioned like 4 times in the entire Bible, only four times. And those majority are found, as Patty mentioned, in 1 John, is where you see him used. 1 John and then in 2 John. So let's just look at a couple of those passages, okay? So open your Bibles to 1 John chapter 2 and verse 18. 1 John 2 and verse 18. Now, you recall that he says, do not love the world nor the things in the world, okay? And then he says, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life. He says, these do not come from the Father, but from the world. And the world is passing away, also its lust, but the one who does the will of God abides forever. Verse 18, children, it is the last hour. Okay, so it's the last hour. We talked about that last week, okay? It's the last hour. And just as you have heard, Antichrist is coming. Even now, many Antichrists have arisen. From this we know that it is the last hour. Okay, look at verse 22. Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son. Chapter 4, verse 3. And every spirit that does not confess Christ or confess Jesus is not from God. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, of which you have heard that is coming, and now it is already in the world. You heard he's coming, but he's now already in the world. Look at 2 John, verse 7. For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Okay. So when you go to, this is the only time that the word Antichrist is used. It's not used in Daniel. It's not used in Ezekiel. It's not used in Matthew 24. It's not used any other place than in these sections right here, as John is writing to these Christians in the first century. So what does the Bible actually say about the Antichrist? Well, what number of Antichrists does John say there are? Yeah, he says there are going to be many of them. Okay, and that's what he said in verse 18. You've heard this coming, and there's already there, and there's many of them. Okay, that's what John has said there. Okay, there's many of them. What does John say about when the Antichrist will start to come? Well, he says it's going to come in the last hour, which he says they are now presently in. You've heard that the Antichrist is coming, and many of them already are here, and it's the last hour. You've heard about it. The last hour, that's when they are here. So it's not something that is down in the future, 2,000 years later, 1,000 years later, 100 years later. He said the Antichrist, in his day, presently speaking, are already present. And not just one, but he says, but many of them are here. How does John define an Antichrist? Well, he says this Antichrist, he says he's a liar, a deceiver, denies that Jesus is the Christ, or does not acknowledge that Jesus Christ had come in the flesh. That's the Antichrist. That is the characteristics of the Antichrist or the Antichrist that are in the world. They're liars, they're deceivers, they're false teachers. They deny that Jesus is the Christ. They refuse to believe that the Christ, that the Son of God came in the flesh. Okay, so they're challenging the deity of Jesus being the Christ or the Messiah is what's going on here. Did John say that there were antichrists in his day? Yeah. So the answer is yes. So they're not a future character; they are a present character, and probably still in existence to this day. Are there antichrists, those who reject Christ today? Yeah. And not just in the world. You say, well, it's the world that's like that. The world rejects Christ and denies that he is the Messiah or the Savior. The world does it. Well, no, there's lots of number of religions that do that exact same thing. Even Jehovah's Witnesses, they deny Jesus' deity. They say he is a God, but not the God or God himself. And so even they deny him things. Islam denies Jesus as the Messiah. They say he is one of the great pillars of their faith, a great prophet, but he is not the Christ, or he is not the Messiah. He is not the Savior of the world. In fact, he really didn't die on a cross. Okay? He swooned. And we saw, I think, several weeks ago when we talked about the swoon theory, that's a stupid theory, that he swooned, that, he really didn't die on a cross. Well, any other man would have died on a cross, having a spear plunged up through his side, up into his heart, and went through what he went through. So are there antichrists today? Well, the answer to that is, yeah, they exist even today. Is there any indication from these 4 verses, or even in the context, the only 4 verses in the Bible use the word antichrist, that they will be a great political world ruler who will plunge the world into a war? No. Yeah, but that's not what that's not what John's talking about. John's not talking about a political leader. He's talking about people who rise up who teach false doctrines. Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think that there are probably, I think Adolf Hitler was an antichrist. Yeah, Joseph Stalin definitely was an antichrist, but not in terms of their beliefs. It'd be because of their religious beliefs, but they didn't work as an antichrist, who was trying to plunge a world because of their denial of who Jesus is and persecutors of Christianity. Stalin, maybe. So anyway, my point is that when you look at what John in the context is trying to deal with in his section of Scripture there, he's not talking about a geopolitical world ruler. He's talking about those who come into the church and try to lead the church into apostasy or lead them astray from who Jesus Christ is. So let's talk about the word anti for just a moment, okay? If I say anti-government, what do I mean? Yeah, you're against the government. We have those today who are even within our nation who are protesting that are anti-government. Antifa, is anti-government, anti-system, okay? How about anti-establishment? What do we mean by anti-establishment? Okay, they're against the establishment. If you would, well, maybe even so today, when you take conservatives who are very patriotic in mind, very systematically believe in the government and the rule of law from the president down, the military, then you have those. But then there are those who are anti-established who don't like that. Or if you think about fathers who came up through the baby boomer generation who amassed a tremendous amount of wealth, they have children that come along saying, we can't stand our parents because they're such capitalists. They only care about money and so forth. So they're anti-establishment into that. So we're against the establishment that is the accepted standard thought in the culture. How about anti-abortion? Well, you're against abortion, if you're an anti-abortionist, okay? Anti-war. I'm a dove. I'm against wars, okay? So how about antiperspirant? Okay, I'm against your odor, okay? And if you've been to Africa as I have, then you say, okay, there's no antiperspirant around this place. Especially if you get stuck on an elevator, and anyway. So anti just simply means one who is against or something that is opposed, okay? So when we use the word antichrist, what are we saying? Yeah, he's just against Christ. Anything that has to do with Christ, that's what he is about. He's not against the politics. He's not against the culture. This person is against Christ. He's opposed to who Christ is. So an antichrist is one who is against what Jesus is about, what Jesus' teachings are about, Jesus' authority. So the men that John is talking about are men who are coming along who are against the authority of Jesus. They deny his authority. They deny his sonship. They deny his being the Messiah. They deny him being deity. They deny who he is. And so they fly at him. And that's what John is saying, that there are going to be many who are coming along, present day, that are anti-Christ. They're against Christ. Before I get to that, think about what Paul was going through as Paul was crisscrossing Asia Minor, okay, on his missionary journeys and into Asia Minor, Macedonia, the region of Galatia, those places there. Think about the opposition that was coming at him. And the opposition that was coming at Paul and that apostolic band there were those who were antichrist, who denied Jesus being the Christ. And in that day, those who rose up against him the strongest, of course, were Judaism. The Jewish leaders who did not believe that Christ came, nor do they believe that even today, for that matter. So they're against or opposed Christ in any way, and so they thwarted Paul or tried to thwart Paul. So that's how we deal with the Antichrist. The Antichrist, in other words, from what John says, is not someone who's coming way down the line as Rod Parsley and Jerry Jenkins and Hal Lindsey and those guys who prop up this guy as the Antichrist, either from the European Common Market or the Jewish sector. But this Antichrist, biblically speaking, was already a present-day reality within the church, okay? They were already there. They weren't coming. They were a present reality and still exists even to this day. Okay, the next one is the man of lawlessness. So open your Bibles to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 through 12. So when you think about 1 and 2 Thessalonians as two books combined, just to start off, what's the theme of, what is the theme, or what is Paul trying to teach about in 2 Thessalonians from your study in the past? What is it about? Okay, the one word that's used over and over again that Paul uses in 1 and 2 Thessalonians is the word parousia. And it means the coming of Christ, okay? So Paul is writing to the Thessalonians about the fact that Jesus Christ is coming, but there are certain things have to happen before that's going to happen, okay? But there are those who are in Thessalonica who are going around saying the second coming has already happened and we missed it, okay? So Paul is writing them saying, no, listen, you have not missed it. The second coming of Christ is still on the horizon. And even in Paul's day, Paul was convinced in his day that he believed that Jesus was going to come back in his time. In fact, I think all generations believe that. I don't think there's a generation of Christians that have come that do not believe that Jesus will come in their lifetime. And that's happened hundreds of generations, thousands of generations since that time. But even today, don't we think that Christ, don't we believe that and hold to the hope that Jesus is going to return in our lifetime? Sure. And that's so different with the Thessalonians. And so the result of that was in Thessalonica, where there were people saying, well, Christ has either come, as some have said, or he is right there at any time here. And so there are those in Thessalonica who just quit working. Why should we work? You know, Jesus is going to come and we're going to get out of this mess anyway. And so there are those who became lazy and busybodies, causing lots of problems. And so Paul writes First and 2 Thessalonians to help the people to be aware of the second coming of Christ and for them to stay on alert and be ready. Okay, but he said there's some things that are going to happen before that happens, and one of them is the man of lawlessness that's talked about in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 through 12. So let's just read what he says here, okay? 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. We'll start with verse 1. Now we request you, brethren, with regard to the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together with him, that you may not be quickly shaken from your composure or be disturbed either by spirit or message or a letter as if from us to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. So there are those who are coming along saying, we have authority and we're telling you the day of the Lord is already coming and you guys missed it. So Paul says, even if someone comes along and says that they have authority, don't listen to them. Even if they come with letters saying that we are in agreement with them, don't listen to them. Okay, because what they're teaching is wrong. So he says, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come, let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness, or I think some of your translations, the man of sin, and the son of is revealed, and the son of destruction, or some of your translations made the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. Do you not remember that while I was still with you, I was telling you these things? And you know what restrains him now, so that his time may be revealed. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work, only he now restrains will do so until the taken out of the way. And then that lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will slay with the breath of his mouth and will bring an end to the appearance of his coming. That is, the one who is coming is in accord with the activity of Satan, with all power and signs and false wonders, and with all the deception of the wickedness for those who perish because they did not receive the love of the truth so as to be saved. And for this reason, God will send upon them a deluding influence or strong delusion, so that they might believe what is false, in order that they all may be judged who did not believe the truth, but took pleasure in wickedness. So let's talk about this man of lawlessness. Paul's primary message concerns the fact that the second coming of Christ has not come. That's his thing. There are those who are coming who said he had already come, and Paul says, no, he hasn't. So I need to put that to rest. So how does Paul say that they should know the day of the Lord or the second coming has not come? From that context. This is a little bit unfair because you're getting caught cold, okay? And I've looked at it a little bit more. But he says, well, in verse 3, that the man of lawlessness has not yet come or appeared. That's how you know he hasn't come. The son of lawlessness, the son of perdition, the man of sin has not appeared yet. That's the one way you're going to know. And the apostasy or the falling away from the faith has not yet occurred. So he says, how do you know that Christ has not come yet? One, he says, the man of lawlessness has not appeared. Two, there's no apostasy that has happened. In terms of a general apostasy that has happened. Now, to some degree, people are already falling away from the faith. And you remember clear back in Galatians chapter 1, Paul says, I'm amazed that you're so quickly deserting him who has called you to the gospel, only to a different gospel. There are those who have twisted the gospel to say something that it doesn't say. And then he says, even if I or an angel from heaven comes and preaches to you any other gospel than that which you have heard me teach, let him be anathema or cursed. I say to you again. And he repeats that same phrase once again. So even at that time, there was a drifting that was happening in the church. In fact, almost every one of the epistles that are written, whether you're talking about 1 Corinthians or whether you're talking about Romans or Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, all of those letters are corrective letters. They're all letters that are giving warnings and telling us how to live the Christian life. But they're all letters that are of an apologetic nature, where Paul is arguing for truth and warning Christians to stay on track and stay within the faith, okay? So there is the beginnings of people that are starting to drift away from the truth. But Paul says, some of people have come along and said that the second coming of Christ has already happened. And he goes, and it has not. Because there's two things that had to happen. One, a man of lawlessness has to show up on the scene, and two, the apostasy hasn't taken place, and that has not yet occurred. What are the characteristics of the man of lawlessness? Verse 4, verse 9, and verse 10. Well, verse 4 says that he'll oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worship. So he stands as an antichrist. You know, he opposes Jesus, he opposes God and those who worship him. So you know that person is on the way. He opposes and exalts himself over everything. He sets himself up as God in God's temple. So God's temple is the place of authority. That's where all authority emanates from in that day and age, okay? So he says this guy is going to set himself up as the authority, as if to sit in God's temple himself, ruling as God himself. So he sets himself up as God, up in God's temple. He proclaims himself to be God. I am God, okay? I am the authority. You need to be listening to me. So verse 9 says that the coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with the work of Satan. So he's going to be an agent of Satan, verse 9 says. It says he'll display all kinds of counterfeit miracles and signs and wonders. They are not signs and wonders, but they're counterfeit, but he's going to lead some astray because they're going to think he is someone great. Can you think of anyone in the Bible who set himself up as a man of great power? Or working on behalf of God, doing it with signs and wonders? Simon. Okay, if you go over to Acts, the 8th chapter, remember, he sets himself up, and people are saying he is the great worker of God. And he set himself up in that kind of way, but he was a sleight of hand guy. You know, he wasn't a miracle worker. He wasn't a wonder worker. He used sleight of hand. Have you guys ever been around a magician that is really good with his hands? I mean, they can make you believe all kinds of stuff. You know, I think where I've seen them most is I was on a cruise ship one time and went and watched a a magician on the stage. That guy. Have you ever watched those guys that yourself? How do he do that? How do they do that? Well, I've known a couple of magicians personally, not friends, but have known them and talked to them about it. And they say it's all misdirection, it's all sleight of hands. There's one guy who came to look at Reggie Gardner's, he had a C6 Corvette. And this guy who was a magician who lived in LA flew out to look at this Corvette. And so he asked me to Reggie was in town, so I sold the vet for him, okay? But I had to rub shoulders with the guy. This guy was so sharp. He picked me, I don't know how many different times. I thought I was unpickable. But he had my wallet. He took my watch off. You know, oh, you probably will want this. Oh, you probably want this back. You know, he's picked me all through this thing here. So I thought, I ought to bring him to church sometime. We could make a lot of money. But yeah, this guy, but he was a magician, you know, and he said it's all misdirection, it's all sleight of hands, and so he did some stuff with his fingers with different objects. This guy, the dexterity of his hands were incredible. He got inside my pocket and took Reggie's keys out of my pocket. I didn't know he did it. Oh, you probably want these back now that I'm done looking at the car. You know, here's your watch back, you know, and he did it to me twice. Like two different times. So he says, well, let me shake your hand. I said, no, you stay where you are. You stay over there, okay? So all I'm saying to you is that it's not uncommon to have people who can come along that are very, very sleight of hand, misdirection, and certainly when it comes to the gospel. But it says this man of lawlessness is going to come and display counterfeit signs and wonders, and he is going to deceive many because of it. Verse 10, in every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing, they perish because they refuse to love the truth and be saved. That's what Paul says. So this man of lawlessness is going to come along. He's going to do every kind of evil, signs and miracles and wonders, and he's going to deceive those who are perishing, and they're going to perish because they have not believed the truth. And that was happening even in Paul's day, and he warns about that, and that's what John does. John warns about people who have come along who are going to be false teachers, who are going to lead the elect astray from the gospel. Okay, so who is this man of lawlessness? Oh, we're going to talk about that later. So what restrains the man of lawlessness? Look at verse 6 and 7. What restrains this guy? And you know what restrains him now. So something, Paul right then, he says there's something that's restraining him even now, so that in his time, he may be revealed, for the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. So this man of laws is on the way, but there's one, even then, it's at present day, but there's something that's restraining him. It's holding him back. So I believe that the restraint that he's talking about is the personification of the apostles. There's Paul, who is standing in the false teacher's way. There's John, who's standing in the way of the false teachers. There's Peter, Jude, all right about those who they're standing in the way of lawlessness being completely revealed, and they're holding it back. They keep beating it back. And that's what Paul is doing here. He's beating back this false teaching that's coming along, saying the second coming has already happened. John's beating back the Antichrist. The Antichrist is coming into the world, is now present, and there's many of them, but he's beating them back. And so they're restraining them. Peter does the same thing in his gospel, or in his two books. Jude, in his small book, does the exact same thing, where they're pushing back hard against lawlessness that he says is already something that is there. But he says, but when they are gone, then there will be those who are more likely to lead people from the true gospel. So once the apostles are out of the way, who stand against them with tremendous amount of authority, even the miraculous things, once they're gone, then there's going to be given a free rein. So when does Paul say the apostasy will begin? Well, after the restraint is removed, the apostasy is going to begin. That's what he says. Once the restraint is removed, so once you have those guys out of the way who stand against it, then you're going to have more free reign. Did the church apostatize in history? For those of you who took Art Clark's class, from what he has taught, did the church apostatize? Yeah, I mean, the church went crazy, and it started happening fast within the first century or the second century. Certainly near the end of the second century, you see the church quickly moving away. So the answer is, yeah. After the strangers move, who is revealed? The man of lawlessness. Okay, so what does Paul say will happen to those who apostatize in verses 8 through 12? They'll believe in lies. They'll believe in lies of the lawless one. They'll be deluded. In fact, he says God will send them a strong delusion that they'll believe a lie and not the truth. Okay, and so there you have those who are going to be deluded because of it, and they're going to perish, is what he says, and they'll be condemned because of it. So the warning is to us is that we always stay vigilant, stay within the truth, and we don't have to worry about these false teachers. Or we worry about them, but they can't affect us as long as we stay within the truth. And the truth is found in his word and not in the imaginations of human beings. So here's the question you're asking, no doubt, is who is this man of lawlessness? Well, he was going to be a leader in his departure of apostasy from the faith, which he predicts. He's going to be a leader moving people away from the truth. Whether he refers to one man or a group of men under the figure of one man, we can't be sure. And I've done a lot of reading in different commentaries, about is this a one-man thing or is this a group of men? And when you look at the apostasy that happened, then you almost say, okay, there are some people that rise heads above other individual, but then there are those who are just a group of people, such as a large council of religious authorities that come together to establish doctrine or teachings. What do we know for sure? However, what we know for sure, however, is that Paul's man of lawlessness was a leader in false teaching. That's the one thing we do know about him. From this text, Paul is in no way describes him as a political leader who will plunge the world into a world war. He's going to plunge the church into apostasy, not a world into war. Okay? So the departure from the faith Paul had in mind is the same as he mentions in 1 Timothy 4 and 2 Timothy 4 that was to happen in the last days, the last era of history of time, which is the first century. So this is not something that's coming thousands of years down the line, geopolitically speaking, but Paul says it's right on the doorstep of the church becoming apostate or going through an apostasy. So the apostasy and falling away from the faith took place as people in the church gradually made changes from apostolic teaching by modifying worship, the mode and purposes of baptism, the organization of the church government, and a lot of other important doctrines. But the ones that uniquely set the church apart from everything else is the plan of salvation, how one becomes a Christian, the importance and the essentiality of baptism by immersion for the forgiveness of sins. Church organization, where you have congregations that are locally autonomous, self-governed, with its own elders, own deacons, and ministers when it's a full, matured church. And, of course, modifying worship, changing the way we worship. Okay, and those are things that if you're looking for the church, then those are the three foundational things that separate the church uniqueness away from the apostasy that is around us in those three areas that you can walk into the church and find out real fast. Walk up to the minister and say, how do I obey the gospel of 2 Thessalonians? Full stop. And see what he says to you or what she says to you. Or look for a church organization. How do they rule? Do they have 23-year-old men who are youth pastors? Is that a biblical terminology that is used there? That kind of thing. So Ward's class on church history really lays out the historical fact concerning apostasy that can be traced factually, and it happens back then and happens even today. Similarities. Like John, then, Paul speaks of those who would come with changes in doctrine as lawless, as antichrists. There's nothing in any of these passages which uses the term antichrist to suggest a political or ruler that brings on World War III or Armageddon. As the Bible defines antichrist, anyone who speaks or teaches against Christ, and specifically about his being God in the flesh, qualifies as an antichrist. And John says there are many of them already with us. So the summary is there are many antichrists, not just one or two. There's many of them. Those are John's words. Antichrist has already existed in the days of John and Paul and cannot be associated only with the end time. We are living in the last days already, as we saw last week, and they were there back then, okay, in the last days that we talked about then. John's term last time or hour appears therefore to mean what we might call a critical hour rather than being a reference to the end time. Antichrists are false teachers of religion and not political leaders. Antichrists appear as Christ's followers but are opposed to his very nature. Anyone who teaches against Christ in the sense of denying him, his nature, his being, the Messiah, or combined humanity and divinity qualifies as an antichrist. And that's what John says. End of class, you're dismissed. All right, thank you.